Hello and welcome. This is World Cup News Breakdown on ThePapare.com, the leading sports hub in Sri Lanka. Sharing the passion of the 11th ICC Cricket World Cup 2015. Co-hosts Australia and New Zealand played out the last game at Melbourne Cricket Ground, and as widely expected, Australia won, but the margin of victory probably would have surprised a few cricket fanatics and certainly die-hard New Zealand supporters. A 7-wicket victory with 101 balls remaining does not do justice to the New Zealanders, but that's how awesome Australia were. To discuss about the match itself and the tournament later on, we've been joined by Roshan Abesinghe, cricket administrator and international cricket commentator, together with Jahan Mubarak, still in the business and has World Cup experience. Gentlemen, welcome. A toss won, probably that's the only thing that New Zealand had on this last game.
I think so, and what I felt, Haritha, always before the game started, I felt that Australia will try to work on certain areas in the New Zealand game. Now, what I felt, or looking at New Zealand, was New Zealand's strategy has been to try and dominate their opponents up front. You know, try and go hard at them, get a good score on the board, maybe try and get a run rate up, and then maybe take a few punches and settle down and try and then consolidate. Now, the openers, either McCallum or Guptill or one of the top three, you know, got amongst the runs. But in this final, it was pretty obvious that the Australians were not going to allow that. Because they were very good at analysing their opponents, and they went hard at Brendan McCallum. They got Williamson, who is such a stabilising factor in that New Zealand batting lineup. And then Glenn Maxwell surprised Guptill. Now, with those 3 wickets gone early, one would have thought that at 150 or 3, with 15 overs to go, still New Zealand were in with a chance. But it was a case of the superior Australian bowling. You know, there is no question about the quality of Stark and Johnson. They can rough up the opponents, and then mopping up was done by Faulkner. So it was sad. I expected the final to be closer, because the fact that Australia was coming in with a bit of pressure, playing at home, up against their neighbour, and with New Zealand in the final for the first time, I thought they'll be pumped up and they'll take the game to the Australians. But you know, the final result didn't suggest that the game had any kind of closeness that we expected.
Just the dismissal of Ross Taylor. He was on 40. It was a 111-run partnership with Elliott, and then Faulkner comes and bowls a wide delivery outside off stump. Is that okay? It would have been intentional, but it also was the result of a brilliant catch by Brad Haddin. But that shot itself, what's your first impression?
Well, it's a wide delivery that generally goes for runs in international cricket. You expect that delivery to go for runs, but I think Australia were bowling so tight overall. I think Taylor himself was surprised that suddenly he's got this ball that he can hit, and was caught unawares. I think the Australians do that deliberately. I've seen McGrath do it. McGrath is the last person you expect to bowl a wide ball. He'll bowl you on the spot, and then suddenly give you a ball that you can hit for 4, and you don't know what to do with it. And I think that's something what happened to Ross Taylor, because they were so concerned on rebuilding and taking it up to the 40th over, and they were just focused on knocking it around. The boundary option wasn't really in their mind, and then suddenly you get a ball that you can hit for 4. I think that's what happened to Ross Taylor. And to add to what you were saying about Mitchell Stark and the opening bowlers attacking the New Zealand openers, Stark himself said at the post-match, I think it was Shane Warne or Simon Doull is interviewing him, that they specifically worked on a plan with Craig McDermott, their bowling coach, to bowl full and straight to McCallum, not give him width, not give him length. And that was clearly the plan, and it took 4 balls for that plan to come together. And I'm sure they had a plan for each and every one of the New Zealand batsmen, even Williamson, Even Guptill, they were talking about him not starting well against spin. The only spinner they had, they brought Maxwell on. And everything that Australia did worked for them.
Yeah, Maxwell, that important wicket and then the run out. I mean, probably didn't have much to say, but that's the intensity with which he was playing on his home ground, much different to Aaron Finch on his home ground in front of his family, dismissed without scoring. I mean, 4 batsmen didn't open their account for New Zealand. That really hurt. I mean, apart from Brendan Macklem, the wickets of Corey Anderson and Luke Ronke in that power play session where they lost 3 for 15 of just 30 balls.
That power play hurt them. That really was the turning point. We were talking, we said how 280 would be enough in a final, that's big enough. But once McCullum went early, 280 seemed a hard target to get. So 250 at 150 for 3, even 250 was something that New Zealand would have managed to defend. But then they lost the 3 wickets, completely lost all momentum.
Just to elaborate on, I mean, he made another 80, Grant Elliott. There was a time where he looked in control of his inning,
he
run
looked
a ball.
in control. He didn't seem to getting much support from the other end. Taylor was just batting for time, occupying the crease, holding one end up. There wasn't really much coming from that end. Again, they didn't have the luxury of attacking Australia's 5th bowler. This is the same thing that happened to India, where they couldn't attack Watson or Maxwell, and that was the problem for them, because it allowed Faulkner, Stark, Johnson to hold on to their overs, and when it mattered in the power play, you get the best bowlers bowling.
And Michael Clarke handled the team very well, especially the bowling changes, I thought.
Yeah, because I felt, as Jehan said, the planning was good, Haritha. I mean, in international cricket today, there is so much of thinking that goes into the game, you know, before a game starts. They look into detail in terms of the lines and lengths and overs to bowl and that kind of thing, and the pressure that you build. And yeah, Clarke had a plan. He executed it well. He knew exactly, as an experienced captain, what to do and what not to do. And obviously, you know, when you think so much, when you're so involved in the game, when your entire mind and body and soul is in it, it's natural that, you know, these things just start working. And for Australia, it was a big moment, especially for Clarke, because it was his last game. Going off on a high would have been what he wanted, and that's just what he got.
Yeah, I mean, 83 and 40 for Elliott and Taylor. Yeah. Apart from that, only 3 others got into double figures, and of that 315 was the highest, which doesn't speak much. 3 for Mitchell Johnson, 3 for Faulkner, which got him incidentally the Man of the Match award, and of course a couple of wickets for Stark to become the joint top wicket taker, and that Maxwell's wicket. Okay, getting back to the Australian reply, but before that, let us remind you, send in your tributes to the legends, Mahela and Sangha Legends tribute fan page, and you can appreciate their contribution to cricket. Sangakkar, of course, ending up as the 2nd highest run scorer in this tournament, over 500 runs, just behind Martin Guptill, who had, I think, 6 runs more than what he eventually got. Just getting back into that Australian reply, one early wicket, but never had the game in a situation where they could have sort of made even Australia flutter?
No. I don't think so, Haritha, not modern cricket. I mean, I know people are trying to draw comparisons between India in 1983, when India bowled out 183 in 60 overs, and they just beat the West Indies. I mean, cricket has evolved a lot since then. I mean, you know, it's a completely different ball game. If Australia was to lose this final, I mean, no amount of excuses would ever.
Especially without Daniel Vittori. Vittori had a problem with his foot, and there was no way that he was going to be effective, and that's why McCullum tried him early on, wasn't working, and he went back to his fast bowlers. They were saying that Warner had a chance, a half chance, that went wide of first slip. The ball before that, second slip was taken out and put in at extra cover, because Warner hit a couple of boundaries of South. The very next ball went in towards second slip. If a wicket went there, would they have been able to put pressure on Australia? I don't think so. It would have meant that Michael Clarke came out earlier, and he certainly had a point to prove. He probably would have made 100 on his final game if that happened. That is what I think would have happened. And I don't think Australia were in danger of losing that at any point.
And the way he sort of went about, I mean, he had such a good control of the game that he sort of outshone Stephen Smith, got there before him to the 50, and in one particular over from Tim Southee, four fours in a row.
That was a bad over. It looked like Clarke wanted to end the game quickly, but he got two long hops wide. And actually, after the first short ball, which was cut for 4, McCullum changed the field. He gave him a mid-wicket and basically wanted him to bowl straight. The second one was shorter and wider, which he hit over point for 4. That was a bad. There was one good shot which he hit along the grounded drive, but apart from that, it wasn't a good over. New Zealand by that time had lost the plot. Their best bowler, Trent Boult, I think had bowled out by then. McCullum had no other option to go to with Vittori injured. It was just going downhill from there.
I mean, it didn't work. Stephen Smith on something like 15, the total was 68 for 2 in the 15th over. The ball trickled and hit the wicket, middle wicket. The bails didn't dislodge. I mean, it was such a day.
Yeah, it was such a day. But I felt, Haritha, when you looked at the way, when I watched New Zealand batting, I felt, with their batting, New Zealand had given up the game. Just go back if you can and look at the 6. Tim Southee hit Mitchell Johnson, and what I want you to look at is his immediate reaction after the 6 when they met in mid-pitch. His facial expression to me told a story. New Zealand had lost. I mean, it was just one of those sixers. New Zealand had just caved in. That little bit told me that New Zealand had lost this game, and they were not all out. Of course, they were 8 wickets down at that stage. They were good as buried. But the point is, you would, still want to come out and believe that your bowlers could do a job. But when one of your players tend to, with his body language, tend to demonstrate that you're kind of resigned to the fate, that shows that it was all over far before the game was over. So New Zealand had actually lost it.
It would have been nice for Michael Clarke to have scored the winning runs, but 6 short of that mark.
You can't expect fairy tales all the time, Haritha.
It would have been nice for Vittori to take 5 and win the match for New Zealand. Vittori's last game as well. And he has done as much for not only New Zealand cricket, but for cricket in general. And to me, Daniel Vittori has been the best spinner that we have seen in world cricket, simply because he is the only finger spinner that we have. He's the best finger spinner that I have seen.
You're talking through your own experience also?
Yes, he is the best finger spinner that I have seen. When I say finger spinner, Murali is a wrist spinner. A lot of the Ajmal, Ashwin, there's a lot of wrist involved. Afridi, definitely wrist spinner. So of the finger spinners I have seen, Graham Swan is good. I think Vittori is better.
Yeah, Swan, I think, hasn't created an impact as much as Vittori has done in one-day cricket, for sure.
And having played against him, I can say that he's easily one of the best finger spinners I've played.
And Mitchell Starc, player of the tournament.
Deserves by far.
A country mile.
Yeah, no comparison. I mean,
just for that wicket of McCullum, you could give him the man of the match, I think.
And the way he bowled, I mean, the pressure he creates at the start, and you give him the ball at any moment of the game. I mean, he's able to rough up the opponents.
When you consider Pat Cummins and Michelle Marsh in the reserve list for Australia,
and vice captain George Bailey, I mean, their bench could have played in any team, any other team in the World Cup. Yeah. That's the depth of the Australian team, that they could bring any one of those 15 in and they still would have won the World Cup.
You believe it's the system that got Australia this World Cup against New Zealand?
Yes. I believe that their domestic structure is strong, that their players can develop their game even though they are not a part of the national setup, which is why we get these players coming in. Stephen Smith comes in, Josh Hazlewood, Mitchell Marsh, George Bailey, guys who haven't really done a lot at international level, but they've performed at the domestic level, and they come into the national team, and their game is, they're ready to take on anything that comes their way. The management itself, from the captain to the administrators to the selectors, encourage individuals to look after their own game and give them the responsibility. If you perform, if you do well, you're in the team. And we see that even Watson was left out after one game, came back strong, held his place.
You try to share that with Jehan?
Yeah, I do agree, and I also feel that the Australian players have a greater incentive. That is the reason why they're doing well. Not just Australia. I mean, England have suffered a bad World Cup, but if you look at their system, I mean, most people try to draw parallel with Sri Lanka cricket and try to talk about the Sri Lanka domestic scene. You see, what I feel the problem in Sri Lanka is not to do a lot, or let me rephrase, not a lot to do with the number of clubs or the number of teams that play. It is to do with the facilities that the respective teams have. You see, it's the amount of money that gets poured into the game. If you look at the Australian, if you look at the English, if you look at the South African players, they are...
What about India?
Yeah, India also. Yeah. You see, they are true professionals to the fingertips. They can afford to hire their own trainer if they want. They can afford to go and have a, have their own practice, do a lot of things. But if you take our Sri Lankan cricketers, sadly, there is no security outside, cricket for Sri Lanka. You see, there is no guaranteed security. There is a debate in the minds of a first-class player in Sri Lanka who has not made the grade between playing domestic cricket in Sri Lanka or doing a job or going to England and Australia and continuing their career. So I think the problem is there. Australians have the facilities, have the infrastructure, and have enough money that gets poured into the game to incentivize a player, to motivate a player to want to perform and to give his best.
We are discussing the 11th ICC Cricket World Cup. This is a World Cup news breakdown on ThePapare.com. We are the leading sports hub in Sri Lanka, and once again reminding you about the fan page, the tributes for Mahela and Sangha. Send them in, appreciate what they've done. The two of them, together with probably Pakistan's Misbah ul Haq and Shahid Afridi, then Brendan Taylor of Zimbabwe. There will be a few others from the West Indies, I'm sure, together with probably Daniel Vittori and of course the stated retirement of Michael Clarke after this World Cup. But that's not what we are discussing. Thank you for all the excitement and the contributions for one-day cricket. What is it that Sri Lanka will probably learn out of this? You started talking as an administrator. You started talking about the structure. Well, what's wrong with what happened to Sri Lanka?
Haritha, let's face it. Let's go back.
How much time do you have?
Yeah, we can, that's a good question. 1996, when Sri Lanka won the World Cup, what was our structure? Go back and think. We had 20 odd clubs playing. You see, it has nothing. It has something to do with the structure, but it has also got to do with the way the players played. You see, to start with, there is nothing new for Sri Lanka to learn. I believe the selectors will be the first to admit that they got the combination wrong going into the World Cup. That, I think, was the starting
point. That's not
point.
what they said at the press conference. They said it was the players' fitness. They never once admitted that it was the combination that was wrong.
If the players, if you're talking about the players' fitness, how many players were lost out due to muscle pulls or muscle tear or fitness-related injuries? How many players? It was all broken bones. You see, broken bones or broken hands and things like that. You see, so I don't know how much of this player fitness contributed. Of course, fielding, yes. Player fitness, running between wickets, bowling, sustaining game. The cricket as a game needs a player to be at its best. But I feel the selectors will be, maybe they didn't admit openly, but they will admit that the first things that they did was wrong. I mean, let's face it. I'm sure they will. I mean, my thinking, was Dimuth Karunaratne the right choice to open? I mean, we did grave injustice to that young man, getting him into that one-day side and then humiliating him, batting him down the order, and then he gets left out because of an injury. Was Jeevan Mendis the right choice? Let's ask ourselves that question. You see, these are two glaring examples. I mean, we can go on, as Jehan asked, how long do we have? So, what Sri Lanka needed, I mean, what better an opportunity? Sangakkara, Mahela, Dilshan, Herath, Malinga, 5 champions in their own right. Sri Lanka didn't have the best bowling makeup, but Sri Lanka was a good enough side. So, there is nothing new that we needed to learn. It was a case of, I feel, just not performing. That's all. I mean, and some of the decisions in that quarter final left much to be desired.
South Africa, with all that was there, were they unlucky, or was it part of the game?
That was part of the game. They were unlucky, but again, as Roshan said the other day, that comes with the game, the thrills and spills of the game. South Africa looked more tense, more under pressure, which is why those missed errors crept towards the end of that game. But look, I think they've shed that tag of chokers. They've shown everybody that they are not chokers and that they can compete and go on to win World Cups. I think this team is still young enough. There are a lot of players in this team who can play in at least one, if not 2 more World Cups. And in the years to come, this South African team is one that needs to be watched out for.
Did India choke?
Indians weren't good enough, Haritha. On those pitches, they weren't good enough. As I said, they were lucky to get into the semi-final. They got into the semi-final simply because they played Bangladesh. I mean, if they had played the West Indies, they've got through. Any other team, they wouldn't have. So, I feel Indians were lucky, and they should be thankful that they got that far. And that side was not going to cope with the strong Australian bowling. Maybe India, New Zealand would have been a close again.
Maybe. Again, depending on where they would have played at New Zealand.
Yeah, where they would have played.
So again, I would have backed New Zealand
to win.
But
certainly, you couldn't have backed India to beat Australia with this Australian side in Australia. No way.
Thank you, Roshan. Thank you, Jehan. Thank you, the backup team. This has been an experience for us, a first time experience, I should say. ThePapare.com, Sri Lanka's #1 sports hub, sharing the passion of the 11th ICC Cricket World Cup played in Australia and New Zealand. We thank you for being through this series of discussions, and I hope your feedback would help us, and we'll be back with more cricket coverages of this nature. And until such time we meet again, once again, enjoy the gentleman's game.
Fire up your home or office with ultimate speeds. Keep up with the next generation on Dialog 4G. Connect to the fastest network with burst speeds of 40 Mbps. Go 4G with monthly plans starting at just 1,400 rupees. Dialog, the future today.